Hello there, guys. Just wanted to go over the renting an apartment lesson that you guys were assigned, and just to make sure that you have clarity and understand what you are and were expected to do for this particular assignment. So, what we have here, well, as a reminder, before we left school, for our corona break, one of the things that we had to do is we were talking about budgeting. And so with budgeting, one of the components that you have to think about is where you're going to live. So perhaps when you get a little bit older and graduate from high school, you may decide that you want to rent an apartment. Well, here are some things, or in this particular lesson, they're going to talk about some things that you should consider. So if we look here at our learning objectives, for this particular activity, the things that you were supposed to be able to do is identify some of the important things to consider when you are deciding where to live. Also, you should have been able to find an apartment that meets the things that are important to you, your priorities, and of course, something on an apartment that fits into your budget. And then whenever you rent an apartment or you rent a home, you have to sign a lease or rental agreement. And so in this lesson, it also shared with you, um, gave you an example of a rental agreement, and you were supposed to go through it and look at some of the things. So the lesson was broken down into 5 different pieces. It's estimated that it should have taken you about 45 minutes to complete the entire lesson, but of course that depends on you as a student. So it may have taken you a shorter period of time or a longer period of time. So let's look at section number one, or activity number one. Activity number one wanted you to look at this particular question and provide your response. And the question is, imagine you are renting your first apartment after college, or let's just say after high school or after military, whatever your option is, or whatever you plan on doing after school. Imagine you were renting your first apartment, and then they wanted you to think about what are the top 3 criteria that you would use to evaluate, whether the apartment is a good fit for you. And so some possible answers could have been how close it was to, or how close it is to the mall, or how close it is to my job. Is it affordable? Does it have more than one bathroom? How many rooms does it have? These are some of the things that you may want to consider whether or not an apartment is good. Where is it located? Is it located on the nice side of town, or is it located somewhere in the hood? Things that you want to consider before you choose an apartment. And so that was what you were supposed to do for section number one. Section number two, there was an article that you were supposed to read about different things that you should consider. So number one, in section one, they were asking you, prior to you looking at this article, what are some criteria? What are some things that you would think about before you rent an apartment? And in section number two, or in activity number two of this particular lesson, they are sharing with you some of the important factors that you should consider. And so it says, after graduation, you need to consider where you want to live with your parents, close to home, a whole new city or state. And they wanted you to skim through the 14 factors and then identify 2 of the 3, or 2 to 3 items that would be most important to you. So let's see if, and hopefully my screen will share with you the article. And for whatever reason, if it does not, then what I would like you to do is to go back, if you haven't already done so, and click on the link and find it. Let's see if I can find it. Da, 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 da. Okay. So again, I'm hoping that you can see this because I told the computer to share my screen. And so here's an article that says, where should I live? 14 factors when deciding the best place to live. So here are some things that they said that you should look at. Of course, affordability. You want to make sure that you're living within your means. We are talking about budgeting here. So it's important that you can find something that you can afford. Another thing that you may want to consider is taxes. And so do you have to pay taxes where you are? If you are still living in Georgia, yes. However, there are some states where you don't have to pay state taxes, and there are some states where you don't have to pay sales taxes. And so in this particular article, it shows you some of the states where you don't have to worry about paying sales taxes. Another thing you want to consider is, before you choose to move somewhere, is, are there employment opportunities? You may not want to move somewhere where there are no jobs unless you don't mind commuting. For instance, I commute about 55 miles each day, which means I drive about 55 miles each day to work. That may not be something that you want to do. And so you want to consider, are there employment opportunities where you live? Another thing you want to do is look at some point, the real estate value, looking at, because maybe you don't want to rent your entire life. At some point, you may want to buy a home. And so if you want to buy a home, you want to know, what are the houses costing in the area that you are planning on living in? Is the cost of housing going up? Is it reasonable? If you buy this home, can you expect for the value of your home to go up? So these are some things to consider. You certainly want to look at crime rate and statistics, because I would hope that you wouldn't want to live in a high crime area, because, of course, if that's being the case, then you won't be safe. You want to live in an area where you can feel safe. If family and friends are important to you, then you may want to look at the distance that your apartment is to where your family and your friends live. Another thing to consider is a climate. Right now, we live in a pretty decent climate where we have, some decent warm weather. We have some rainy days, but we don't have a lot of snow, thank God, or a lot of brutally cold days. And so climate is something that you want to think about when you are choosing where to live, as well as number 8, which says the educational system. You want to find a place, let's just say later on down the line, you decide to have children, then perhaps you want to find a place where the schools are good. Culture, you want to look to see, what things are available that you can do culturally, such as going to sporting events, or if you're a person who likes art and theater, does the place that you're choosing to live offer these particular things in close proximity? Are you easily able to get to different things like that? Let's just say, if you like seeing concerts and stuff, or do you live in an area where they have concerts? So culture. Commuting, if you're not a person who drives and perhaps you need public transportation, of course, most of you are probably familiar with the Atlanta area and know that they have the MARTA system. In Augusta, they have some type of public transportation system. I'm not sure what the name of it is, but if public transportation is something that's important to you because you don't know if you want to have a car, or let's just say if your car breaks down, then you may want to consider that as well. You want to look at food options too. Do you have grocery stores where you can find good food? If you are into eating healthy things, do you have a place where you can easily get to the healthy food choices that you need? Town or city size, do you want to live in a place where it's very small? Do you want to live in a large city? Another thing to consider. Healthcare facilities. How close are your hospitals and your doctor's offices and your dentists? Eventually, hopefully, you will want to travel more outside of the state of Georgia. So how close are you to an airport? And so these are just some of the things that you want to, or you should consider before deciding where you want to live. Of course, those things are going to vary based on who you are and based on your interests, but just some things to think about. Okay, for activity number 3, you were supposed to, in this particular activity, you were searching for an apartment and comparing some of the things that you found about the different apartments based on some of the different criteria. So in the first 2 activities, it was talking about things that you should be considering, or the criteria that's important to you. And then in activity number 3, you get the opportunity to actually go and look for apartments. And so what you had to do is click on this particular link. And then once you clicked on the link, it brought up a different page and a different sheet that says compare and find an apartment. And there on that sheet, you found let's see, there was 3 different parts. So in the first part, what you were supposed to do is, again, think about what are some of the things that you want in your apartment or that's necessary for you. Do you mind sharing with someone else, with a roommate? Um, what about the surrounding area? In the previous section, we were talking about safety and restaurants and all things like that. So these are some of the things that you were supposed to identify in number one of part one. Number two wanted you to determine how much rent you could afford. And if you can remember, or if you recall, before we left, we did an activity in which you had to locate the salary, the median salary or the annual salary for a career that you were interested in. If you remember what that number is, you can use that number. Or number two, they suggest that you could use 50,000 because what they said on average, a starting salary for a college graduate is 50,000. Of course, that could be up or down. But what you could do is you could use that particular number. Question number two asks, what is your major and what is your median wage in early career? Again, if you remember the information from the last assignment that we worked on, in which you had to identify the career that you wanted to go into and the wage, you could put that information in there. If not, you could have clicked on the link where it says the labor market for recent college graduates, and then you could have found the median wage early career salary there. Answer that number two. Number three says a proper rule of thumb when renting an apartment is to spend no more than 30% of your gross salary. And so for this part, you would just simply multiply whatever you listed as your salary in number two times 30%. And then that will tell you about how much you could afford to spend each month for rent. Then in part two is where the fun part begins, because this is where you actually get to search for an apartment. So number four, it says, well, before number four, it says, now that you have now that you know how much you can spend on housing each month, and you have some criteria to evaluate whether an apartment is a good fit for you, it's time to start the search. And then you were supposed to do some online research to find 3 different apartments in a particular city that you would consider living in, and then you were supposed to answer the question. So number four says, first you have to select the city. It can be your hometown or a totally different city that you are interested in. And so for my suggestion for you here, hopefully you chose another city, because we know that in Crawfordville and in the surrounding areas, there are not a lot of apartment complexes. I think there may be some in Greensboro, but perhaps Thompson, if you wanted to branch out to Athens or Atlanta or Augusta, or even out of the state, it would have been a good idea for you to choose one of those cities. And then once you selected the city, you were supposed to answer that in number four. Number five tells you to use an apartment search website to find 3 different apartments, and then you could use the 2 different links here to find it. You also could have used something like Apartment Finder or apartment.com to find 3 different apartments. And then pretty much what you were supposed to do down here in the bottom is just fill out this table with the correct information. Where is the apartment located? Which website, where it says link to apartment listing, which website did you use to get this information? If you are planning on sharing your apartment with roommates or housemates, how many housemates or roommates are you having or going to have? What would be your rent per month for just you? So let's just say if you were living by yourself, then you would put whatever the website shows you for the rent per month. But if you were splitting the rent with someone else, then you would want to compute or calculate how much you were spending per month based on you splitting the rent. Generally, when you rent an apartment, you have some type of application fee and deposit, and so you were supposed to list that information here. Utilities, a lot of times the apartments will tell you if utilities such as water or gas is included. Keep in mind, a lot of times those bills are separate, so they wanted you to figure out, about how much or an estimate could you expect to spend on utilities. When they talk about amenities, they're talking about things such as, is there a pool? Is there a gym? Do they have a car wash? Renter's insurance, do you want to buy? Most places nowadays do require you to purchase renter's insurance, and so it'll be a good idea for you to kind of do some research to find out on average about how much is renter's insurance for an apartment. And then furniture. On the website that you selected, it should tell you whether or not the apartment comes with furniture. And then if it's not furnished, then you would want to think about how much money you would want to spend on your furniture. And you would have to think about how many rooms do you have. So for a 1-bedroom, you probably need something something for your bedroom, maybe something for your living room. If there's a dining room, maybe something from your dining room. So these are some other things to think about. And then in any other pros and cons section of this table, you can put in any good things or bad things that you learned about the 3 different apartments. So once again, you're basically going out, finding a website that gives you information about different apartments that are available to rent, and then you're just conducting research, looking through the website, and then finding the information that's located here on the table. In part 3, it tells you to select one of the 3 apartments that you researched above, and then you're just pretty much just providing like a brief reflection. Which apartment did you select and why? And number 7 says, if you were actually searching for an apartment to move in, what next step would you take? So that could be collecting enough money so that you could afford the down payment. It could be applying for the apartment, finding roommates, whatever your next step was. And so that was the comparing finding an apartment activity in a nutshell. The next thing, or the next assignment for lesson number 4, was for you to look at a rental agreement. So I mentioned before, when you choose to rent an apartment or rent a house, you have to sign a lease or a rental agreement. And so if you were to click on the link that's located in section 4 of this document, it should have taken you to a rental agreement. And on this rental agreement, you will see that there are a few different parts. There's a fine print, and it tells you to read the fine print. And it starts off with clause number 1, and it's broken down, at least the copy that I'm looking at, and hopefully you have the same copy. It's broken down into 25 different sections. And I know how sometimes you guys don't want to read, but if you would just go through it and look at it, you don't have to read everything word for word, but you will notice that it starts off by identifying who is the landlord and who is the tenant. The landlord is going to be the person from whom you're renting the apartment from, and then of course the tenant is the person who is responsible for the rent and the person who lives there. Okay. It also identifies or shows the address of the place that you are renting. That's in number 2. In section number 3, it talks about the uses of the place that you're renting. So of course, because you're renting a home or you're renting a house, it's for private use only. It's a private residence. You're supposed to live there. You're not supposed to be necessarily conducting a business out of there. Another section of this rental agreement tells you for how long that you are renting the place. Generally, it can be from anywhere from a month. It could be all the way up to a year or even more. So it gives you information, and it also shows you or tells you that if you choose to move out earlier, you have to give your landlord, which is the person who you're renting the place from, notice that you are going to be moving out, and then like to have it out at least 90 days in advance. Clause number 5 shows how much you're paying for rent. Then it also shows how you can get the rent to your landlord, the different forms of payments that they will accept. They also talk about when your rent is due. There's also a section that talks about late charges. What happens if your check bounces or is returned? They talk about any type of deposit that you're responsible for. It also talks about the different utilities that you are responsible for paying for, such as your cable and your internet. It talks about you renting the place to someone else. Let's just say if you need to move out and you choose to let someone else who's going to take over the lease for you, they give you instructions on that. Talks about your responsibility for maintaining and keeping up your apartment, any types of repairs. Talks about things if you are breaking any rules or laws or causing disturbances. There's a section on here that tells you whether or not they allow pets. There's a section on here that talks about whether or not the landlord has the right to enter your apartment, or what rights they have to enter your apartment. Another section that talks about if you plan on being absent from or being away from your place for a certain amount of time, what you're supposed to do. Also talks about more about your responsibility for paying the rent and what happens if you doesn't. It talks about any type of court costs and fees that you should expect to pay if you don't pay the rent. And then there's also just other information on here about legal things related to if there are any problems, or if you need to get out of the agreement, and then of course in the bottom section that you're going to sign. So again, a lot of information, but this is just to give you an idea as to what a rental agreement will be, because at some point either you guys will be renting a place or you will be purchasing a home. And in the event that you are renting an apartment, then you want to know what you are expected to, some of the responsibilities you have, and then what is included in the rental agreement that you're going to sign. Finally, in section number 5 is where you can find information, or is your exit ticket actually. We're wrapping the lesson up. And here are the 3 things that you should be answering in the exit ticket section. Number 1, what are 3 things to consider when determining which city you want to live in? So this goes back to section number 2, where it was that article and they gave you 14 different things to consider before choosing an apartment. Number 2 is a hypothetical question. It says your cousin has just graduated from college and is starting her search for an apartment to rent. What are 3 steps you think she should take during her search? And so again, you could refer back to the article in number 2, and then you can also think about the things that you did when you were comparing the apartment or completing the comparing apartment assignment back in activity number 3. What are some of the things that you looked at when you were comparing the apartment? And then number 4 is a true or false question, and it says you pay a security deposit before signing your lease agreement so you can secure your spot for the apartment. And then if you were to look back at the rental agreement assignment in activity number 4, there is a section that talks about security deposits, and on there you can find information about security deposits. And I will tell you that it is true, you have to pay a security deposit before signing your lease, and that way that does secure your apartment. So this was activity number 4. Briefly explain. It may seem like it's a lot, but really it's not. It's just taking the time to conduct some research and finding out what options you have if you choose to rent an apartment sometime, once you graduate from school, and then what you can expect to find in a rental agreement. If you have any questions about this assignment or something still seems unclear, please make sure you reach out to me and I will help you in the best way possible. Also, once you have completed the assignment, if you would go ahead and submit everything in Teams, that would be wonderful. If you're having a hard time submitting each of the activities in Teams, you can also email the information to me and that will work as well. So that's it for now. Hope everything makes sense, and I will talk to you soon.